Chuck Kalinick. I'm a reenactor. And for 36 years, I used historical reenactment in my classroom to bring history to life for my students. And I would wear the garb for the period, and I would play the music in the background, and I'd have artifacts or, realia, things that students could touch and handle and make history more real, because being able to touch stuff always makes it more real. And now I'm no longer in the classroom. I'm repurposing myself. So what I've been doing is I've been doing my historical reenactment just like I did in class, except that now I've shifted my focus to cover events in California history. And so I've gone up and down the state and filmed a bunch of stuff on the missions and the Presidios and all that. And if you take a look at my channel, you'll see those videos. By the way, it'd be nice if you subscribe too. And share it. Boost the signal. Well, I'm done with the missions and the Presidios. So now what I'm doing is I'm chasing something else. When I was looking at Mission San Miguel, I ended up reading about a number of famous outlaws that used to frequent the saloons that were right by the mission and also in the mission, which sounds weird, but I'll explain in one of the later videos. And there were names like Jesse James. Everybody knows who he is. And the Dalton brothers and Tiburcio Vasquez. And I didn't really get who he was for a bit, but I knew the name Vasquez Rocks. Turns out Vasquez Rocks are named for him. And Joaquin Murrieta was rumored to have been around there. I'd heard the name before, heard the name associated with movie titles, and I got intrigued. Then I started trying to figure out if the paths of these people ever crossed at the saloons or at that mission. Well, now it's evolved into something else. I'm now starting a new series that I'm calling Chasing Bandidos and Lawmen. And in this series, I hope to track down the different California bandidos or outlaws, whichever term you prefer, and to track down the lawmen that straightened out California. And I hope you stick with me on this series. So one of the little nuggets that I ran across when I was starting to research the criminal element of California in this era was the large number of names that were of Spanish or later Mexican descent. And Tiburcio Vasquez, Vasquez Rocks is named for him. Joaquin Murrieta, who seems to be the benchmark that everyone was compared to, because Joaquin was considered to be the baddest of the bad. And there was his sometime partner, Solomon Pico, related to the famous Pico family, and the Solomon Hills were named for him. Different spelling, but they're named for him because he used them as a hideout. And Procopio, who was a nephew of Murrieta, and he was a partner at times of Vasquez. And I noticed that they were often being described as Robin Hoods, that they were fighting against racial injustices which tended to happen in that time and were actually pretty common. And a lot of that came boiling out, during the Mexican War. So maybe that's a good place for us to start. Okay, let's take a look at factors for the rise of the Bandidos in California. For one, the United States seizing control of California from Mexico could have had something to do with it. Now, in 1842, the United States had a little miscommunication problem with the commander of the Pacific Squadron, who was under the impression that the United States and Mexico had gone to war, and he had orders of, hey, just in case this happens, take control of Monterey and the Presidio, which he did. And then he found out the next day that the two countries weren't at war, and so he handed California back to Governor Alvarado, who very generously threw a ball in honor of the American commander. 4 years later, in July of 1846, Captain Mervin from the Pacific Squadron comes ashore here at the Custom House in Monterey, and he raises the American flag on, let's see if I can get it. Yeah, that flagpole. Or at least a facsimile of that flagpole. And the Presidio basically falls without a shot being fired. And then the campaign starts going south, and by 1848, Mexico has signed the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and California and the American Southwest become, well, the American Southwest. While the United States annexing California certainly vexed the native Californios, it was the laws that followed which made it really bad. For one, Americans demanded a precise accounting and proof of who owned what land, because right before the Mexican War, Pio Pico's basically conducting a fire sale, and he's, handing out land grants all over the place. And the way land grants were traditionally done is you submitted a hand-drawn map. Everything is hand-drawn, but I have to use that phrase to drive it home. The map of the proposed rancho, called a diseño, it's really a sketch. It's kind of like, there's a river, trees, mountain, all right, and that's kind of the way it works. So saying a mountain was a boundary line to your property was kind of imprecise, and you have to really think about this. This is the gold rush. Everybody wants land, and the reason they want land is they think that the gold is just lying right underneath the surface. So everything's got to be all measured out and very precise. Well, that meant anybody who had a Spanish land grant, because there were some of those, or a Mexican land grant, because there were hundreds of those, they had to provide proof to the American government that they indeed owned this property, that the grantee owned this piece of land, which is on this sketch, which sometimes really wasn't accepted as proof. And while most people managed to retain their land, it was a really horrible, lengthy process, and often, it could take like 17 years. And at the end of going through this process, and finally the government saying, yes, that is your land, the grantee had to sell off some of the land in order to cover the legal expenses. So there was a lot of resentment about that. Okay, now we got to talk about the gold rush, but that's not going to be our main topic. It's just going to be a catalyst for what we're going to be covering in this. January of 1848, James Marshall, he's helping build a sawmill for the Sacramento land baron John Sutter. And what ends up happening is he's letting water run through the mill race, and he sees some shiny stuff. picks it up, and when he returns to the mill that they've been building, he announces, "Boys, I think I discovered a gold mine." And he takes the metal to a Sutter, and they privately weigh it, test it, figure out this is gold. And Sutter realizes that this could really screw things up because the area is going to get invaded if word gets out. He says, "We got to keep this quiet." You can imagine Marshall. "What did you do, James?" I told them there's a gold mine." Well, they tried to keep it secret, but pretty much it's on. A lot of workers were taking time off and they were digging, they were panning for gold. And then one of these geniuses goes riding into San Francisco in May of 1848 and is waving around a bottle of gold dust and announcing to the world, "Gold! There's gold on the American River!" And San Francisco starts to empty because everyone is now looking for easy pickings. Oh, but San Francisco's going to fill up soon. Now that everyone has, or the majority of the people that were in San Francisco, formerly Yerba Buena, have cleared out in pursuit of gold, the military governor ended up going to visit the gold fields, and he's checking us out with an assistant, Lieutenant William Tecumseh Sherman. He'll become more famous during the Civil War. And he's finding out that the workers there who are panning for gold on the American River, they're making $100 a day. And that's like a month's pay back on the East Coast. And he reports this to Washington. So of course word spreads. Now everyone's flooding out here. There's going to be explosive population growth. And one of the things you have to think about is, okay, at the time of the discovery of gold in 1848, the native Californian population, Native American population, was approximately 100,000. By the way, pre-European contact, there's a number of different estimates, but the one that I'm tending to lean towards is 250,000 Native Americans. So between 1769 and 1848, look at the huge drop in numbers. Oh, and there were about 14,000 Californios. A year later, there's 115,000 non-native residents of California. The population of San Francisco, which used to be Yerba Buena, now it's San Francisco, goes from, in the space of 1 year, from 800 to 25,000. The people are flooding in so fast, there's no way that construction for housing is going to be able to keep up. And even if the housing is constructed, who's going to be able to buy it? Because these are people who are flooding in from all parts of the country because they're seeking the golden dream. Remember, the people that were panning for gold up on the American River, when the military governor went to take a look, towards the tail end of 1848, they were making about $100 a day, and that was about a month's pay to someone back east. Well, let's throw some more oil on the fire. There's another law that really upset the Californios, and that was in part because Mexican miners, or the miners who came up from Mexico, miners like digging miners, not like, kid miners, and the ones that, the Chilean miners, they were very successful at what they were doing as far as finding the gold and getting it out there. And a lot of American or Anglo miners were very resentful of it. And so what came to pass was a foreigner tax. If you were a foreign miner, you had to essentially buy a license or pay a fee of $20 a month for the privilege of digging in the ground and hoping that you find gold. And so that's going to be a real sticking point with some of the Bandidos later on. So when they ended up robbing Anglos, they figured this is payback for what they considered to be unfair taxes, the foreign tax. Okay, in order to get more of an idea of where the Bandidos are going to be coming from, you have to understand the vigilance committees. Now, I'm not going to do the whole big thing here. That gets a separate chapter. But you need to get a taste for what they are, because the vigilance committees are, well, actually, a vigilance committee is going to set Joaquin Murrieta in motion because of the justice they handed out. And here's the way it worked. You have all these people coming into California, right? The population of the state is just growing by leaps and bounds. It's overwhelming the infrastructure. There may be some sheriffs around in the counties, but you're not really looking at a whole lot of law enforcement. And the vigilance committees evolved in the mining camps, but they really got going in the pueblos, in the cities, and that's the reason I'm dressed like this. You get the idea, reading about them, that, it was a bunch of drunken yahoos in the mining camps. No, that's not all of it. For instance, in the first vigilance committee in San Francisco that was founded in 1861, then it'll get dissolved and then it'll get refounded. They had 700 members, or claimed they did. And a lot of them were men of property and standing and business leaders, which is explaining the garb. As far as how these committees worked, you gotta take a look at the idea. There's no jails. Or there were very few jails, and they were near the coast because they were built by the Spanish and the Mexicans, and they were made of adobe and they're crumbling. Besides, the population was a lot smaller back then. You're not looking at the vast numbers of people that are going to come in because of the gold rush. And so what are you going to do with these people? Okay, San Francisco actually had a ship. They had a prison brig that was anchored in the harbor, so bad people could go over there. But otherwise, there's not really a prison system. So what do you do, with people that commit crimes? Well, they would get put on trial, except that the trials, the justice system, tended to be more about the rights of the community than observing the rights of the individual who was accused of a crime. And you could see very common punishment would be whipping somebody, like 50 or 100 times. I was reading accounts of one poor guy got whipped 20 times, and then he confessed to whatever it was he was doing. He was supposed to get whipped 50 times, and he was told, yeah, okay, we'll stop doing that, because your sentence is going to be 100 lashings or whatever, or 50 lashings for each day until you finally tell us, where this stolen gold is. Oh, here it is, after 20 lashings. And basically the person acting as judge in the mining camp's like, okay, give him another 30. So, rough justice there. If you really were a pain to the community, especially like in the mining camps, you could be banished. Maybe from the mining camp. If you're really bad from California, if you're a foreigner and really bad, they deport you. Okay, what else can you do? Shave someone's head, because that would be public shaming, and that would be like a scarlet letter. Oh, actually, there's another form of something kind of related to the scarlet letter. Let's say you were a thief. A brand would be made up, and you would get your cheek branded with the letter T for thief, or R for robber, or HT for horse thief. I don't know if they would put an H on one cheek and a T on the other, or if they would just simply let that dominate your face. Photography isn't a thing. So in order to make sure that people know that someone is a criminal, yeah, there's the head shaving thing, but a more permanent solution would be to, besides branding, crop someone's ear. So wherever that person goes, people go, look, that's a bad person. And maybe that would just be the top of the ear, or maybe it'd be the whole ear, or maybe because people were feeling really vengeful, both ears. And this was explained away as popular justice is better than no justice. But this will be part of the breeding ground for the Bandidos that we're going to be looking at in this series. Okay, so here we are at the original jail for the former capital of Alta California, Monterey. No, I haven't shown you any Bandidos or outlaws yet. Looks like we're going to have to cover that in the next video, which is going to be about one of the first murders that occurs during the gold rush and a mass murder event that takes place at the former Mission San Miguel. I hope you stick with me on my journey.